So this is Phil SOUSSAN of the band Last in Line. You may know me from some previous projects, some other things such as Ozzy Osbourne, Billy Idol, Vince Neil, or whatever, but Last in Line is what we're doing right now. We've got a brand new album coming out at the end of March entitled Jericho. It's our third album, and we're very excited about it. It's getting great reception, and we can't wait for you to hear it. So please have a listen.
Beautiful, Phil. Thank you very much for joining us today, mate.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all, brother. So as you mentioned, Last in Line will release your third studio album, Jericho, on March the 31st. So firstly, how are you feeling about it?
Very happy with the album. It's been very long coming because it went, we had to put this thing together through a trying and difficult time, as I'm sure everybody can appreciate. I think we came out with something that we're very proud of. Actually better than I thought it was going to be, because we had no idea, you know, how it was going to be with all of the hurdles and restrictions that had been, you know, placed in front of us during the process of coming up with this record. So,
yeah. So tell us a bit more about the album from a musical point of view, mate, and what you were going for with it.
Well, I think people who have listened to the second album noticed a definite progression from the first album. Obviously, sadly, Jimmy Bain is no longer with us, and he was very much part of that first album. And I originally was asked to come in to finish some shows that for which there had been some obligations from the first record. And during that time, we realized there was a great chemistry that was going on in this band. And the second album came up. When that second album was written, obviously I brought in some different influences, and so people would see a progression from that first to the second album. And I'd like to say that you continue that trajectory, and this is where Jericho now is. So it's different from the second album. It's definitely an evolution from what we were doing on that second record. It's really, I think it's really nailed certain things that make this band unique and different from others. And for that, I'm very proud of it. I think it's a good record.
Very cool. And you've released the single Ghost Town so far, mate. So that's the only one that you've released from what I can gather. So why choose that song to represent the album?
I have no idea.
I love your honesty.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, sometimes what's that expression? You can't see the forest for the trees, or can't see the trees for the forest. I can never remember which one it is. But when you're working on a record that closely, sometimes I don't think you're the most objective person in knowing what should be what. If you were to ask me when we were working on the record what the single would have been, I would have picked. I picked something completely different. I was convinced it was something else, and maybe all of us were. And then what we did is we took the record and we sent it to everybody else. We sent it to the label, we sent the management, press, people whose opinions we respected, to see what comes back. And everybody unanimously came back with Ghost Town. So we were like, oh, well, what do we know? You got to go with what, you just don't know. You just don't know. I mean, it's a very common situation that people think that the song that they always think is going to be the single or the popular song on the record ends up not being so. And it's the sleeper that comes out. And it's a surprise to everybody. So I'm very happy. I mean, I love Ghost Town, but I wouldn't have known that was the song to release. So.
Oh, very cool. And the first song on the album, Not Today, Satan, starts with a massive drum intro before guitars and the vocals kick in. So how much, like these days, how much thought, I guess, and time and effort goes into picking the first song on an album? Like people's attention spans are that short these days. You want to grab them straight up. So how much do you think about that?
It goes around us for quite probably a good couple of weeks, getting to the point where we're listening to our mixes and we're starting to decide what sounds best as a first track, as a second track. I mastered this album, so because I do quite a lot of studio work, I do a lot of mastering, mixing, and production as well. So, but we start messing around with that from the minute we start listening to our mixes. And we'll you pretty much know, you get a good sense of what's going to go into what. Viv's really astute with this stuff as well. He's really good with that. And so once that debate starts, we'll start creating a playlist and listening to it, and then we'll suggest changes. We want to make sure that keys sound complementary next to each other. We want to make sure that tempos also sound complementary. You don't want to have two things that are just rubbing you the wrong way. But eventually it comes together, and it's never been a great effort with us. So, you know, that's how the running order happens. It's not, but it's very much generated within ourselves. It's not from outside.
Okay. I'm glad you told me that you mastered this one, because it means you're going to be able to answer these next couple of questions good for me. So I read it in the press release that Vivian said that you cut the basic tracks for the album live. Like, for the benefit of people like myself, even, and I'm sure there's others out there that don't quite know what that means. So what does it mean when you say you cut the album live?
Well, what it means is we're going into a studio and we are trying to get that performance as a unit, rather than a lot of I mean, his experience with Def Leppard is that they tend to cut stuff. I think they cut stuff to almost to a drum machine, and the drums are very much the last things that they add with a Def Leppard record. I might be wrong about this, but I think that's how it goes, and that would be a good example of how something can be piecemealed and assembled together from individual parts. What we try to do is try to go for a live performance. So when we're going in there, we're not just saying, "Oh, let's see if we get through this song and play the notes right." We're seeing if we can generate a little magic. So if we'll listen to 2 or 3 or 4 takes, there's one that's going to jump out and say, well, this one sounds like there's some excitement in the track, and we want to keep that excitement. So we try to cut that live. Way back in the day, if you were Elvis or someone like that, they would stick you in a room and put a microphone up, and they had no way to overdub anything. The only option you had was to cut it live. Okay, let's start at the beginning of the song, we'll turn the tape machine on, at the end of the song, it's done. And gradually through time, we've had the ability to overdub and to add instruments and to correct things. And when you take that, run that to the other end of the extreme, you can actually take the individual parts and completely assemble them after the fact. These people might not even be in the same room together. So that's what we mean. Right.
Did you find that, like, leading into the albums, then, that you try and play as much of the album live when you do any gig as possible to sort of get you in that frame of mind, or does that not really matter?
When it comes to live shows, I mean, I wish we played even more of our stuff live. Yeah, I would like to. You know, we tend to play 3-4 songs from a new record until we can integrate it. You know, one of the things that we deal with a lot is, you know, people unclear as to whether we're a DO, you know, heritage band, or whether we're a unique original band. And we are a unique original band. There are some songs, of course, that we have played, some DO songs, for which Vinny and Vivian were very much responsible. But they also act as somewhat as placeholders in our set as we start to come up with new material. We switch some of that stuff and we put progressively more and more of our own material in there, original material. And we're now at the point where we have much more original material than we have of the previous catalogue that Vinny and Vivian participated. Yeah. I'm glad to say people love it, which is something you can't hope for. You can't make happen. I mean, you know, we're very blessed and very grateful for this. I mean, honestly, Kris, when we go to a lot of shows, you see a band that you want to see, they're playing the hits, and they play a new song, everybody goes to use the bathroom collectively at the same time, you know. And in this case, that's not what happens. And for that, we're, you know, like I said, I have no idea how that happens, because you can do everything right in this business and there's no guarantee of outcome. But here we've hit a chord with people, and people like it. So I'm very grateful.
Keep doing what you're doing then, brother. It's working.
That's
it. You mentioned the fact that you mastered this album yourself too, mate. Like, I've always wondered, like, is it difficult for you to do a job like that from being inside the band? Like, you basically got to critique your own stuff. Is it difficult to sort of separate yourself from the songs to be objective, I guess?
Yes, it is. You're right about that. But I would say that applies more to mixing than to mastering. To mixing, you know, you really have to have it's always great to have a third ear. I've always believed that it's better to have somebody else mix the album than the person producing the album, because that person producing the album sometimes gets carried away with their own thoughts. Sometimes they hear things in their heads. Maybe they've heard that vocal so many times that it's mixed down a little bit because they take for granted that they can hear it. So somebody mixes the album, the producer produces the album, and the mixer gets that and then says, no, let me bring out all the great bits. This bit's exciting. I haven't heard. Wow, that's fantastic. That needs to come forward. When it comes to mastering, that's more of a technical process. It's really taking it and making sure that it complies with audio systems. I like to try to describe to people who don't know that mixing an album makes your songs sound good. Mastering an album makes your stereo system sound good.
Well, that's pretty much does it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, right. So that I don't have to be. I don't. It doesn't matter if I'm familiar with the stuff. If I'm too close to it or not, I'm just trying to make it sound as best as it possibly can.
And we spoke about this a little bit before, but you came into the band in 2016 after the debut album Heavy Crown. So it was under less than ideal circumstances, of course, when you came in. But was it difficult for you to come in under those circumstances?
No, I mean, emotionally difficult. Yeah, you could tell there was obviously there was a great sense of tragedy. It was it's a little bit like we were a bunch of rodents and we had the wheel taken out of the cage and we were waiting for the next thing to be put in. You know, Jimmy was a dear friend of mine. I was very close with him. In fact, when I first moved to America, we actually lived together, so we were more than friends. And I had a huge amount of respect for him. But playing in Dio and me playing in Ozzy, we had a mutual admiration for each other within the bands, and we considered ourselves to be sister bands, if you like. So he was my counterpart in that other band. So I was familiar with how he played. I was familiar with the energy that he brought to the band, the talents he brought in. So I just tried to channel him. I tried to play what he would play. I tried to play his songs exactly the same way he would have played them. And over time, as we've gone to some of our newer and more original material, I've allowed myself to play my own style. But when we do play the songs that he played on, I try to pay some kind of tribute to him or some kind of homage to him by trying to play the way he would have done it. And I think we keep a respect and we try to keep his legacy going in this band. You know, he was a big part of it, and he was a dear fellow. So, you know.
Yeah, very cool, man. Very cool. So you mentioned earlier on that the band has changed musically from Heavy Crown to Jericho. So are those changes more subtle sort of changes, do you think, or are you sort of?
I don't know that they're that subtle. I mean, if you put Heavy Crown on, and you put the second album, which is called 2, and you put that album on, you'll definitely hear a lot of differences. And I would say that's a great, 25% of that is having a different person in the band, and bringing in slightly different influences, more contemporary, more just an evolution. I'm now starting to think that this band is showing that it's moved into a direction which is very unique. I don't hear too many bands that sound like we do. I could imagine where I would hear a classic rock band try to sound, more modern with different sounds, different, textures, but not so much with different songs. And we've managed to sort of make that happen. So again, I'm very pleased for that. But there is definitely a change, an evolution over these 2 records.
Do you think part of that's that you're slowly starting to find your own musical identity, I guess, as a band, Last in Line? Like, you've all played with so many other people in the past, and the band was shaped on Dio's music, of course. So that stigma's sort of still been there from the start. But do you think they're actually starting to branch out and create a Last in Line sort of legacy?
Absolutely. I think it's, that you correctly say that it was originated from this nucleus of the original Dio band. I think more than bringing in the sound of Dio, I think what that brought into the Last in Line was the way in which the songs are put together and are written. Because back in the day, with Dio, they would do the same thing. They would go into a studio cold, plug in, and see what happens, and see what comes out. And that's something that Viv and Vinny were adamant about keeping with Last in Line. So we do that differently from everybody else. We don't come in with demos. We come in with nothing.
Wow.
We come in and we plug in and we say, well, let's see what happens. So that is very common to the Dio stuff, more so than the style of the music. So we're now starting to see that. I mean, 25, 35 years later, has it been that long? 35 years on, all of a sudden everybody has new influences. Everybody has now progressed, and we're seeing what that result is today. I would love to see what Ronnie would be doing today as well. I'm sure it would be quite different, but sadly he's not with us anymore. So.
It is indeed. It is. Okay, Phil. Well, thanks very much for your time today, man. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. The new album, Jericho, from Last in Line, is out March 31st, and I've been privileged to have a sneak listen to it. And it is a band that is definitely finding your own identity, mate. It rocks in all the right places and kicks ass in all the right places, mate. Champion effort. Hopefully you guys make it to Australia one day soon to play it for us.
Absolutely. We're way overdue to do so. I need to come over there. I've worked with a lot of your country folk in the past, and it's time to come to Australia. So,
all right. Well, if anyone out there is listening that brings bands over, these guys are keen to get onto it. But in the meantime, check out Jericho because she's a cracker.
Thank you so much, Kris. You take care, mate.
I don't mean to be suspicious, but the